Welcome to Transformations, interviewing people changing our world. I'm your host, Diane J. Shaver, and as you've seen by now, every person I've interviewed is someone who saw something that touched them so deeply, they stepped up to do something about it. And we all have that power. So today I have the great honor of interviewing a woman who has been stepping up for quite a while and really addressing something that needs to be healed. And her name is Cherry Steinwender, and she is executive director and co-founder of Center for the Healing of Racism. Welcome, Cherry. It's lovely to have you on Transformations.
Thanks so much for having me. It is a joy to be with you this morning.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. Okay, so Center for the Healing of Racism started in 1989, incorporated in 1992. Here we are in 2020. We're having the same discussion. What is that about?
Well, Diane, let me say that no, we are not having the same discussions. See, I have been doing this for 31 years. And many people, I mean a lot, would never have this conversation. And in fact, even to have the word racism in our name, I have had people really tell me that we should take the word racism out of our name. And I would often say to them, well, what do you want me to replace it with? The Center for Healing Diversity? I'm not healing from diversity, I'm healing from racism. Within many companies across the United States, within their HR department, they offer diversity and inclusion workshops all the time. And this was just a nice way, a little fluffy, little fluffy words. But a lot of people knew that, but they still wouldn't have the conversation around racism. It was very interesting to me that this word, racism, has so much power. We've allowed it to have so much power until even when incidents happened in the news before the murder of George Floyd in May. People never talked about racism, not really. And in fact, I was really shocked in the 2016, election when the politicians was on the road and everything else. Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton was the only two people that called attention to what it really is. Systemic, structural, institutionalized racism, which is still alive in this country. So I would have to say that, no, we haven't been talking about racism. George Floyd's death, his life was taken away from him. And with that, the nation now have begun having these conversations.
I think that's a really powerful way of saying it. And it is what's going on. Why does this continue? What is it that people don't see about how we treat one another? Why are people blind?
Well, one of the things that I have been doing a lot lately, I have been instituting workshops using Zoom, probably 40 since the murder of George Floyd. And the workshops that I'm doing, a lot of them now is a look at our racial conditioning. And until we can become brave enough to really understand how we have been conditioned to see each other as so different, to play out this us and them, it really continues. The other thing too is not understanding what racism is, because so many people will go, oh gee whiz, I'm not a racist. Well, the bottom line is, number one, this organization have never in 31 years called anyone a racist. That's not the way we work. It's no way you can call people a negative word, and for white people to be called a racist, as I understood it from a workshop I attended at a national organization given by a white professor. She said, for a white person to be called a racist is a fear second to death. And that was very interesting for me to hear that, because I knew public speaking was the fear that was second to death. But now it's race to be called a racist. So we've never did that. The other thing too, in our name, it says healing racism. You could never, ever begin to heal racism if you're going to call people negative names and then disguise this as if you're doing something that's, really transformative. The other thing too, because most people don't understand what racism is. Many of them think, and they will actually say this, well, I've never called anyone a bad name. I haven't, spit on anyone. I have not done either of these things. Not understanding racism isn't just individual acts of meanness and even violence. Racism is an institution that was created in this country to play out this us and them.
Yeah. Why and how do you think it was created? And I also want to say that I think a lot of racism comes out of ignorance. And it wasn't until I did research for a book I was writing on the Middle Passage and what happened after that, that I became aware. So what is that fear? What is all of that about that underlies what racism is?
Well, I really loved what you said, that you went out and you did the research and you read this book. For many of us, we have been miseducated and all too often no, education at all around the world's people, which consist of a large, diverse population. Within Houston, Texas, we hold the title of the most diverse city within the whole United States. And that is very joyful for me. But most of us, as I said, I'll go back to say miseducated or no education at all. And I really love using the words of Martin Luther King when he said that we hate each other and we fear each other because we really don't know each other.
Yeah.
And we don't know each other because we have been separated from each other. And so if you look at the separation, there are no laws on the books right now that would cause us to be separated from each other. We do it out of habit. We do it out of fear. And we always looking into our comfort zone. And so if I don't really know you, and so many people will say, well, I go to school with people of color. I work with people of color. And at best, that's parallel playing. Because do you really go to each other's house and sit around the kitchen table? Do you really celebrate the passages of life with people that look totally different from you, such as births, anniversaries, birthday parties, deaths, all of these things? To me, until we can get comfortable being in those arenas around the kitchen table, at best, we are parallel playing with each other.
Yeah, I agree so wholeheartedly. So how are we going to sit down together? How are we going to arrange that?
Well, let me say to you, it's not going to happen magically, just wishing for it to happen. You have to put action into your words. You have to put action to the place. I was on a Zoom workshop we conducted the other day, and there was a woman in the Zoom that was totally different from me in every way, was born in a different country, looked totally different from me. And before the chat was over with, I invited her on the Zoom chat to come over to my house and let's eat, or invite me to your house. You see, we have to be intentionally now. Just wishing for something to happen, it's not going to happen. It's going to stay the same way it's been.
Yeah, I agree. Can I just read very briefly? This says it beautifully, and it's lyrics from South Pacific that was written, what, in the 60s?
Yeah, from that movie, You Have to Be Carefully Taught.
Yeah.
Song.
You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You have to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, when you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. So is that an inherited thing? How do families keep that going? What do they tell their children? How does that go? And I think it's more subtle than, don't go around that person. What do
Well,
you see?
well, in the workshops that I've been conducting, a lot of them, a look at our racial conditioning and how we have been conditioned from birth. For many babies that breastfed, their mother breastfed them, sometimes we say it's like passing this poison along through the milk from the mother's breast. That's how early it starts. And a lot of this, the way that it's like no harm intended, a lot of adults, our parents, our extended family members, other adults around us when we were little, said things that was very hurtful, told negative jokes, even what we look at, given nonverbal communication, which is just as dangerous and sometimes more long lasting. The other thing too is like, and looking at you, that I am sure that when you were growing up as a little girl and some adult wanted to read you a children's book, whether they bought the children's book or it was handed down in the family, none of those children look like me.
Yeah.
None of those children look like people from, say, even Native Americans. Oh yeah, I know Walt Disney came out with Pocahontas, but even with Walt Disney, when looking at all of those characters, it wasn't until probably within the last 20 years that any of the people other than the one with Pocahontas was any other than people of European descent. So and then that's not all. For many of us, we hold this up as a Christian Judeo country. And the bottom line is, when you look at even the Bible, do you see people that look like me? Oh yes, I've seen a couple of pictures in a pictorial Bible that the people look like me standing half naked, fanning the pharaohs or something like that. So when these images are not seen, even within your faith community, your parents or any adult, they never have to say anything. What you are looking at as a child is positioning your worldview. When you go to the educational system, and I can remember, and you may remember this too, the first little book we learned to read through, if you were educated in the United States, and in this little book was a family, and none of them looked like me. And the little boy was Dick and the little girl was Jane, Dick and Jane. And so these things not necessarily have to be given to us verbally, but when the whole world, when you don't see yourself, that sends a powerful message. And I want to go on notice saying that the lessons that our parents gave us, that our parents were not bad people, but they too did the very best that they could with the lessons that they learned. Another thing that's very interesting also is that I think it was up until the 50s, over 60% of all African Americans was in white homes, raising white children, teaching them what love and life was about. And for many of those white children, they loved those people of color. I have had white people, male as well as females, as in their 60s, and they could still remember that Black woman that came into their house that they learned to really love. But at the same time, they're loving this woman, but they are seeing the woman being treated differently from anybody that looked like them. She's coming into the back door. She's not allowed to sit at the table and eat. And yet and still they disguise it saying, well, Lula is a member of the family. Well, you sure didn't treat your family member very well. And these kids are observing all of that, which as adults, they begin to play that out.
Yeah. I think of the book and the movie, The Help. I mean, it probably illustrates that perfectly, about people having maids and having them do the most basic thing, take care of their children and feed them. I mean, the things that are essential to humankind, and then the treatment. Yes, I saw that in my family as well. So tell me about some of the workshops you're doing for youth and some for adults, and they are different, but the ones for adults are like, boom, I felt that the kids are a little more gentle. So talk to us about the workshops, and how they are being effective and what changes you see as a result of them.
Well, we were working with adults for the first 10 years of our history. And then it became apparent that we needed to start with children at a very young age and trying to put together, how do you teach this lesson to little children? And it came to me probably in a dream state, but I know it's 4:30 in the morning, that every human being eat bread. It really doesn't matter what culture you're from. We all eat bread. And when that came into my mind, I really didn't even know the vastness of what I was talking about until I went on a quest in Houston, Texas, to see for myself, Cherry, are you really on to something? And what I found, because of living in such a diverse city, I can get all of the breads. However, it takes almost 3 hours to shop for the bread because there's no one vendor that sells breads that children eat globally. So in looking at that, I put a workshop together for little children, and after which I even wrote a book, and the book is entitled Bread is a Simple Food, Teaching Children About Cultures. But in the lesson itself is to give children an opportunity to see breads that many of them have never seen, and to even talk about some of the histories of these breads to the children, and to let them know, and which is repetition, but I have them repeat probably 3 or 4 times within the workshop, that bread come in different colors, different sizes, different shapes, but it's all bread. It all belongs to the same bread family. Little boys and girls, we come in different colors, different shapes, different sizes, but we all belong to the same human race. And this is repeated 3 or 4 times through the workshop. And because of these workshops, I have been called by children the bread lady. So hey, that's my alias, the bread lady. But what I, in that workshop, is to let children know that we're all good and we're all beautiful. And that to say hurtful things that they heard adults say is really not okay. And these are the lessons that I teach, and I have been doing many of those. And as a result of it, the Holocaust Museum, twice a year for 6 years, they have future teachers of America from all over the United States come to Houston, Texas, stay a week, and twice a year for 6 years, I would go into the Holocaust Museum and educate these future teachers using the bread, as well as each one of them will take away one of our books. And of course, in the book is twins. Well, everybody in the book, I know them personally. They are not fictitious people. There are twins of Zach and Zoe. And Zach and Zoe are Jewish, and their mother helped fund that book.
Wow.
For teenagers, because of the study that was done in the United States by the Race Relation Task Force for One America of the 21st century, they did a study, and one of the results of that study is the stereotypes. The stereotypes that people learn at such an early age, which seeps into policy making as adults within all institutions. So with the teenagers, I have a workshop, and the workshop is around stereotypes, and to be able to get them to see not only the stereotypes that they have heard in their own lives. Some of them they have used, and to be honest about that. But knowing the stereotypes, that's not the problem. Acting on them is. So there are various workshops, and even to look at bullying and how much of the bullying is around physical characteristics.
Yeah. How do you reach these kids? How do you get them into the workshops? How do you reach the adults? How do you get them to come to the workshops?
Well, with the educational system, that's very easy because we target schools. And of course, teachers wanting to be able to have these lessons brought to their school, they will contact us. And mostly everything we've done so far have been, word of mouth, even with adults. And so adults that have attended our program, Dialogue Racism, or either one of the other programs we put on, if it really soothes and set right with them, they take it out and tell everybody else about it. And so that's how we've been able to do this and to roll this out all over this country.
Oh, I love that. That is wonderful because it's so necessary. And it also strikes me that racism is not just about people that are African American. It's about Native Americans. It's about all indigenous people. It's about people who are Jewish, as you had stated, anybody that's different. And Jewish people obviously originally came from Middle East and so forth. So why is it that white became the standard? What's up with that? Why?
Well, in looking at and really studying this, we have to understand that as European ethnics came to the United States, they did not come here with the classification of whiteness. And in fact, my husband of 39 years came to the United States from Austria. In Austria, nobody called themselves white. And when he arrived in this country and people started telling him he's white, and he kept saying, I am not white, I'm Austrian. Because see, they didn't have that classification. But within the United States, the term whiteness was introduced for the first time in the 16th century. And it was at a time when the poor whites of Ireland, which was indentured servants, had more in common with the indigenous people of this country as well as the people enslaved in this country. And because they had relationships with each other, many of the elitist whites of Europe felt they would get together, form a coup, and overthrow everything that they had. So in order to make sure that the poor whites would align themselves with the elitist whites in this country, they gave them something that they can identify with, something that they can see. So now you are white like us. See, you're not like those other people. You're white like us. And so because you are white like us, we're going to give you just a little something to seal the bargain, so to speak. And it really broke up the relationships between indentured servants and Native people for the most part. But it was a political strategy in order to make sure and to guarantee the power of whiteness in this country.
Wow. That is stunning in a way. The thing that also has struck me over the years is that the skills that we need came from indigenous peoples, came from African Americans who were brought here, how to raise certain crops, for the indigenous people, how to live on the planet so that you don't destroy it. It's like everything we need, the indigenous people had, and the people who are non-white had. And when we separate ourselves out, then we lose those abilities.
Yes, yes, yes. And I love the saying all the time, better together. If we could just realize we are better together. And in fact, within my life, I said I have lived many lives. And the way that I frame it, I have lived many lives because in my life, there are people from all over the world that share my kitchen table, that we share life with. that I share their religious and cultural holidays and festivals. So when I say I have lived many lives, it's because all of the lives of the people, I live it with them. And we are better together.
Yeah. I think that's so powerful. And it is in those moments of sharing bread, sharing holidays. For me, via Zoom, I have friends in Africa, I have friends in India, I've interviewed people all over the world, and that gives me a glimpse of what it's like. So how do we get people to even begin to have a glimpse of what it's like from another culture and the richness that everyone brings? Everyone brings a different understanding, a different point of view.
Well, let me go back and really look at how we came into this world. I think when you're talking about a show dealing with transformation, I think that we need to go back to the way that we entered the world. And one of the things that I will say over and over again is that as little children, we came into this world wanting and desired connections with all human beings. That's who we are.
Yeah.
And until we can find spaces to begin to sit with that, knowing that, see, I know that. In my heart of hearts, I know that. And because I know that, it's easy for me to go out anywhere in this world and be at one with the people. And I think we need to go back to that we were not born to be oppressors in no way at all. We were not. It was taught to us. And if it were not taught to us, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, we probably would have stayed the way that we were born naturally. Little children are natural allies to each other. You put little children together, they just want to play. And this will continue until they start receiving messages that cause them to separate from each other.
One of the things as you talk, it strikes me that we are a culture that's stuck in our head. And when we get into our heart, then we see exactly the way you're talking about. But that you have to be in your heart for that to happen. Stuck in your head, you can pick up whatever propaganda is going on, but it takes getting in the heart. How do we get back into our heart as a culture? Because I think we've lost that. And the riots that are going on and all the hatred that's going on, that can only come from being stuck in your head. So to me, one of the big problems, one of the big issues is how to get into our heart. So you're in your heart. How do you get there? How can we teach people to
Well,
do
let me say, Diane, the workshops that we conduct, and we have conduct hundreds of thousands of people. And whenever they attend our programs, we let them know that you will only talk about yourself and you will speak from your heart. Anytime we recognize that you're coming from your head, we will interrupt you and ask you to move that from your head to your heart. And you see, this is where the power is, because most people, they don't want to talk about feelings. And it's very difficult for a lot of people. But when you make them go into that space of talking about feelings, and even not to allow husbands and wives, significant others, partners to speak for each other, you can only speak for yourself. And what we say over and over again, your change and growth may, however, inspire someone else. But to go into the arena thinking you're going to change people, that's crazy thinking. You know I was crazy when I was dating in my early years. Boy meet girl, and boy had a few faults, and all of a sudden Jerry went, oh, but that's okay. I'm going to change him. I'm going to fix him. You can't change or fix anybody but yourself. And it takes a lot of hard work. I'm not going to say to you that this is just easy. And don't ever think that you will attend one workshop, listen to one podcast, and think that, and attend one Zoom that you fix, because that's a lie. Don't lie to yourself. It took all of our lives to get this messed up. And it will probably take the rest of our lives to undo it. But I'm committed. I am committed to doing that.
So what are some tips that I'm laughing because I've spent my whole life growing, and it's been hard, it's been difficult, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But what can we say to people to help them realize that they're in their head, and how, just some tips, and to get, I know we can't fix everything, I get that, but just some things that you can say to people who are listening to see when they're stuck in their head and how to get back into their hearts, or just have the awareness that they're separated from their heart.
Well, one of the things, if you really want to begin to take it to the heart level, instead of saying, I think, you see, we get thoughts from people all the time and opinions. Maybe you may want to reframe it and say, I feel. And so when you go to that feeling place, that feeling is coming from the heart, not just the head, because see, I could think a whole lot of things. I could repeat a lot of stuff to you out of my head. I could even, when I talk about the oneness of the human family, when I know that we are all Homo sapiens sapiens, I know that we all have at least 99.9 DNA in common. And so even in speaking, I will never ever use the word different races. I don't do that anymore, because you can't be one human family, all Homo sapiens sapiens, and at the same time be different races. And so I will educate people. If you don't have words that's adequate enough in the English dictionary, make up your own words. And so for me, when I'm speaking about people of different ethnic groups, that's what I'll call them, different ethnic groups, different cultural. I'll use anything, but I will never cross that line and say different races. And in fact, for my husband and myself, he's blonde, white, and blue-eyed. And when people ask for interviews of the two of us, and they say, we would like to do a piece on interracial marriages. And I'll tell them straight up, I will never do an interview under that title. But if you change the title and say you would like to do an interview with a couple of different hues, different ethnic group, anything, I'll agree to that. But I will refuse to let you use different races and think that I'm going to use it too because you chose the title. Because in essence, it's not true. And if we continue to say and see each other as different races, rather than people of different hues, different cultural groups, different countries, different language, or whatever, we're going to stay stuck in that different races.
That's very powerful and very true. Do you remember the experiment they did in New York? They had, I don't know how many groups of people, and they traced where they came from. They all came from Africa, and then they spread out, and the difference in our skin and hair and all that came as an adaptation to the environment in which we lived. So we all started out the same. We went to these different places and adapted, and now we're acting like we never saw one another ever before. Remember that one?
Well, I did not see the experiment. However, for 31 years, we have been talking and educating people that all life began in Africa, all life, and that we all have a common ancestor, or great-great-great-grandmother, and her name is Lucy. And we look at the evolution of human beings according to climate changes and everything else in the population. But there was in the early 90s, there was a book. It was like a comic book, and it was teaching the history of different groups. And in doing so, the little comic book had all the little children in Africa with the one woman, Lucy. And it said, and when Lucy allowed her children to go out and play, they went out playing all over the world. And after so many 100 years, they returned, and the children didn't look like their grandmother anymore. So That was really interesting. But that's another thing too, our lack of really telling the truth, that all life began in Africa. You know, how many teachers ever said that to you, and that we are all Homo sapiens sapiens, that we all have 99.9 DNA in common. You know, how many teachers ever taught us that? So we're still playing out us and them based on false science and misinformation and no information at all.
But the thing that I see is the fear in people, the fear of knowing the truth about our oneness. Why are we so afraid of being connected? What's up with that? I mean, wouldn't it be a much nicer world to know your relative is walking down the street and they might look different, their skin, their hair, their eyes might be different, but they're a relative. And why are we so afraid of that?
Fear, when you read that, the words, I used the words from that song, you have to be carefully taught.
Yes.
You know, if you carefully taught, and even if you tell a lie long enough, often enough, people will believe it. And a part of this separation have to do with fear. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. Martin Luther King said we hate each other and we fear each other because we don't know each other. We don't know each other. And as I said, even though the civil rights laws have been passed and we could go anywhere, you know, attend schools, go to different faith communities, but still in this time, I will say in 2020, you have the legal right to be there, but there's still a lot of people that don't want you there. And this fear is very real, and this fear is taught to us so early until it's hard to undo it. The fear of the other.
Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, this is kind of philosophical, but I wonder if it's just really fear of knowing ourselves, because you had mentioned it before. Learning about yourself and accepting yourself is a lifetime project. And it's hard to look in your eyes. It's much easier to point out there, that person, instead of looking in here, this person. So it's projection also of our fears, of our not wanting to see who we are, acknowledge who we are. It's much easier to put it on someone else. Do you think that's also a part of it?
I think that's a lot of it. You know, and projection is a very powerful tool of not seeing yourself. And how, you know, it's very interesting to me that one of the labels of the stereotypes for people of African descent is that we are lazy. That is also a stereotype of people of Latin descent, that they are lazy. Now, I want you to just sit with that lazy, those lazy people. And I want to go back to a time not very long ago, say 50 years. And when the Montgomery bus boycott took place in Montgomery, Alabama, and the women that were working in the homes of white people in the suburbs, in order to get to work, they depended on other people giving them a ride, to see they wasn't going to ride that bus. They depended on the white women they worked for to come and pick them up. And so what I say to you is, looking at that lazy stereotype, the Montgomery bus boycott lasted a little over a year. If those women stood in solidarity with their husbands and said to their husbands, I'm not going to let Lula come and clean up anymore. I'm going to cook, clean, raise the kids, wash the clothes, iron them, and everything else, because I'm going to stand in solidarity with you. But no, they broke ranks and still allowed those women to come in and do all of that work. But yet and still, they call us lazy. That's projection, putting that on us, that we're the lazy people. People of Latin descent, you know, it's very interesting how we can cry about a border wall, but we allowed so many people of Latin descent to come into this country to do the work. And everywhere you go, you will see people of Latin descent doing the work. But yet and still, you call them lazy. See, they're the lazy people. And I'll never forget, there was a Native American. He was Mayan, and he lived with my husband and I when he was attending law school. And he said to me, Cherry, I have to work harder and study harder. I think he used the number 5 times harder. I have to study 5 times longer, 5 times harder to be considered for a job, a university, or whatever have you. And I said, you know, that's very interesting. As a Native American, you would say that to me, because I've heard that all my life. To be considered as good as any white person, you have to work 5 times harder and study 5 times longer. So this is something that we have to look at and be honest about the project, you know. And so when you look at African Americans with all of the different hues, you have to be honest about all of the rapes that happened during our enslavement that produced lighter and lighter and lighter children. But yet and still the projection onto us that we are the oversexed people. So you see, projection works, and it keeps you from really looking at yourself and being totally honest with yourself.
Yeah. I have a person I interviewed who was also an acquaintance, a friend, and she has an organization called History Matters Institute. And what she said is every African American born in this country is part white. Just what you said about the rape.
And so, yeah, in the book, and they even made a movie out of it about the Delaney sisters. And once that book came out, and they were on all these speaking circuits and everything else, and all these talk shows, and women calling in and saying, "Oh, I wonder if I have any Black ancestors." And the Delaney sister said, "Well, you shouldn't wonder if. You should wonder. The question should be how much."
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting that we want to divorce ourselves from everything that's truly human. What are we trying to become? We're trying to become something that's not real, that's not really human. What is this we're trying to be?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'll have to ponder that for a while. What is it we truly want to be?
Yeah.
But I don't know about everybody else, but I know what I want to be. Totally connected to everybody.
You are. You already are that. And I mean, and there's always more to come. I think as humans, we keep evolving and evolving.
Yes.
One of the things I want to share here, when the day that Martin Luther King was shot, I was in Providence, Rhode Island with someone. We were driving through a Black neighborhood, and our car was stopped. And what they said to us is, Martin Luther King was just shot. It's not safe for you here. Get out of this neighborhood. And I never forget that generosity of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the midst of all of their anger and angst, they saved us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And let me say to you and your audience, I truly believe that all of these shootings, well, not all, but several of these shootings, when the nation took to the streets, a lot of people that were victimized, their children were victimized by being murdered, called for peace and calm, and they forgave the person that shot their loved one. I had an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time with James Byrd Jr.'s mother after he was brutally drugged to his death in Jasper, Texas. And people in prisons were waiting for that family to call for vengeance. And they never did. This family in 1998 showed this country of how to behave in times of total, trauma. And they forgave the people that murdered their son. The same thing true as the little young boy in South Carolina, walked into the church and shot all of those people during Bible study. And that community of people forgave him. And even with George Floyd, that family did not call for what we saw, the violence that we saw. But I applaud all of the people worldwide that took to the streets in peaceful demonstrations to call attention to a gross injustice happened in the front of our very eyes. And see, I didn't ask to see that. I'm just sitting in front of the TV chilling, and for 8 minutes and how many seconds I saw this man being murdered before my very eyes. So I say to your listening audience, but all of the negative stereotypes that have been heaped upon people of color, for people of African descent, we are still a forgiving people for most part. So many of us are.
Yeah. I'm in South Carolina. And the day after the massacre, there was a service at a Black church, and we all went. And the feeling there was one of open-heartedness, forgiveness. It was amazing. And one of the pastors looked out and he said, I've never seen a congregation like this. It was mostly white people coming to say, no, this is not okay. We do not condone this here. And then I called someone. I was so upset. I called somebody, a guy I knew, to talk with, and he said to me, why are you so upset? And that was the end of that relationship, that friendship and the stuff. It's like, when something happens like that, it touches the humanity in us. And I was, again, touched so much by the open-heartedness that I saw, by that asking for and accepting other people, even when they did horrendous things. And all I could come up with to understand it was when a people has been so abused and so having to deal with all that stuff, there's some understanding of humanity that comes. It's not a nice one in some ways, but there's a generosity in that. Can you speak to that?
Well, one of my sheroes is Jane Elliott. And I know the nation know about Jane Elliott. School teacher in a small town, Riceville, Iowa, teaching little third graders. And after Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, she wanted to teach her children about discrimination. And so the way that she did this was to divide the children according to eye color, blue eye, brown eye. Well, after doing that experiment, people said it would never work on adults. She's still doing it. It works very well on adults. And I'll never forget one of the workshops she conducted for adults. She said, the people that's blue-eyed in this room will be mistreated for 2 hours. This is an exercise, a script. Do you think that they will be able to go through this for 2 hours? And the people of color said no. And Jane said, that's very interesting. She said, maybe the oppression and everything that people of color experience in this country put within them a type of strength that whites don't have. See, they couldn't even go through the exercise for 2 hours, knowing it was exercise, knowing nothing physically was going to happen to them. So yes, that was I'll never forget her saying that. Yeah. So it goes back to what you just said. There is something that have been, I guess, because of our oppression in this country, have instilled in something within us that people of European descent don't have it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I also was talking to another African-American woman, a Black woman, and I said, how is it that you are not so angry? Why are you not just seething with this? And what she said to me is, she said, there's no point to it.
Bitterness and corrodes the very soul. So if you think that by being angry and bitter toward you is going to serve me, no, not at all. It's going to destroy me. Yeah. And I choose me. I choose to love Cherry. And it's out of that love for Cherry that I could love you and everybody else. I choose love.
Yeah. That is the most powerful thing, and it's true, and that is in the heart, and that's what connects all of us. Do you see any changes going on in our world where people are beginning to get it?
Well, let me say that all the time during the work that I'm doing is that I repeat constantly, we're not doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. What I see in our world right now, let me just say, go back to May with the demonstrations that happened worldwide. One of the things that really touched me a lot is to see so many white people, not just in Houston, Texas, even though I was down there in front of City Hall with 60,000 people during the COVID time, but I was very, very, very careful. I had my mask and everything else, but I saw so many signs that said white silence is violence. White silence is violence. For white people to make that sign and to carry that sign, that was a very powerful statement. In a lot of these demonstrations that we are seeing, sometimes you have to look hard to see people of color in a lot of these demonstrations. And what I say is that I want them in the demonstrations, but at the same time, when all of the demonstrating is over with, don't ever go back to life as usual. Use what you learned, use your anger, whatever it is that propelled you in the arena to show up, to demonstrate. I want you to use that in your everyday life. I want you to use that to make a difference. And I want you to constantly speak out, because you see, silence is not an option. If there's another demonstration somewhere in the next 100 years, I don't ever want to see a sign that says white silence is violence, because you know you have spoke out. And this is what, so when you talk about the change, this is what I'm seeing, but on a very personal level, and working with so many people, hundreds of thousands of people, for people to literally say to me all the time, you have changed my life. So the work that we have been doing is life-changing. And so we have built a coalition of people of all these different ethnic groups, and to bring them together as human beings under one blanket. And then to know also, the last comment that I will make is to know also that this work, the way that we work, this work is done by one person of color and one person of European descent as a team. Because there are a lot of things that will be accepted when you're talking about racism, by people that look like me, that will not be accepted by you, and the same is true in reverse. So even the way that we put these workshops together have made a total difference. And to be able to know now that I am busier than any other time in the 31 years since George Floyd was murdered. Because people are Googling organizations working against racism, not organizations doing diversity and multicultural workshops. And so now people are looking to have this conversation around racism. So I can only say, and I would like to end with this, it is our time now. For 31 years, we have been talking about racism, and this country just caught up with us. It's our time now.
I love that. And how can people find your Zoom things? Are you doing your Zoom meetings all the time?
Right now, all of the meetings are done by Zoom. And if your listening audience would go to our website, www.centerhealingracism.org. All all lowercase letters, no spaces. And the calendar of events, there's a lot of events listed there. In fact, there's one tomorrow. They still have time to get in on that one.
Terry Steinwender. Terry Steinwender, Executive Director, co-founder of Center for the Healing of Racism. This has been so powerful, so necessary. Thank you for your generosity. I so appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Diane. And if you would send me a link where I could share it with the board of directors of the center, I would really appreciate that.
Okay, it will get edited and put together, and then I will be very happy to do that. I'd be honored to do that. Thank you so much, Cherry.
And thanks
I
so
know
much.
you need to go. I know you need to go, so please feel free to leave. It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Cherry.
Bye.
And thank you to our audience for being with us on Transformation Podcast, interviewing people changing our world, people like Cherry Steinwender, Center for the Healing of Racism. Very, very powerful, something we all need. But remember, if you see something that touches you deeply, you can step up and you can do something about it. We all have that power. So I'm your host, Diane J. Shaver, thanking you for being with us. And remember to come find us again on Transformation Podcast, interviewing people changing our world. In the meantime, you can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and Apple Podcasts. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.